11 o'clock on your Tuesday morning. Welcome in. It is the Extra Point here on, not the Extra Point, the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Guys, I host a lot of shows. It's an honest mistake. I do that at least once a day.
Do you not see us sitting here, Tyler?
I do see you sitting here. I'm looking at the rundown of the show. It says Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs. Honest mistake. Going to make more of those. It's okay. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on your Tuesday here on the game.
As long as we get the Firehouse Subs part
That's
in
right.
there, I think we're good.
Can't forget that. The month of June, we talk about being...
Is it over yet?
It's not quite over yet. As being a slower period, but in the world of recruiting, things are never slow. And yesterday, some pretty significant news. I mentioned at the end of last hour, pretty big flip. Cutter Woods flips from Wake Forest to South Carolina, something that you guys going back to last week felt like was a pretty good possibility that we saw come to fruition yesterday.
Yeah, and I think this is one that also, it was kind of quietly simmering on the background a little bit, maybe even for months. Like obviously South Carolina had some quarterback targets they were going after, and that was the focus. And Cutter did what he needed to do and went ahead and committed to Wake Forest because they were prioritizing him. But, I think I picked up, this was a couple months ago, I picked up that basically Dow Loggins was still very intrigued by Cutter Woods. And then, it happens to work out that they're throwing at the 707 for South Carolina a couple weeks ago. And, Chris, I was thinking, doesn't it work out so much better if you want to get a look at a guy that is committed elsewhere if you have him on that schedule for the 7-on-7? Because then it's not like
convenient.
It's like, all right, otherwise you're having to convince Cutter Woods to come to camp. Like so for those that don't really follow it, you have like these regular camps that you can just go to as individuals. This was a 7-on-7. So, West Side is invited. They sign up as a team. And so then there's no like media coverage of like, oh, Cutter Woods is visiting South Carolina today for a camp. And then Wake Forest is like, come on, Cutter, do you really need to do that? You're committed to us. This is like, Coach, it's a 7-on-7. My team's going. Of course I'm going. And so this has become an interesting aspect in the recruiting process is hosting teams for 7-on-7. But, of course, you want these teams to have some guys you're recruiting. And so South Carolina's been intrigued. What I was told was basically when they watched him throw, they were impressed, with just the progress he has made. He's gotten a little bit bigger, gotten a little stronger, and B, just the consistency he played with throughout that camp day. It wasn't just you're throwing in a against air situation. Like, not that 7-on-7 is real ball, but just he consistently made throw after throw after throw. South Carolina took an in-depth evaluation, and then a couple of days later, they offer, and then Cutter very quickly sets the official visit. I think you can't always read into everything when it comes to recruiting, but just the way it played out, the fact that he quickly set the OV, the fact that he went on the record that he was taking the OV, and then, we reached out. We tried to get an interview on Sunday after the visit, and he very politely kind of declined. The signs were all there.
Sure.
So yeah, South Carolina gets their quarterback for 2025, and this is a guy that clearly they've been intrigued with for some time. And Chris, were you there for the state championship game as well?
I was.
Okay, and so it's interesting. These state championship games are, you can look the last 2 years now. So 2 seasons ago, Lenore Sellers just absolutely going off in the state championship game, which really he did his entire senior year. Might not have been anything different, but had a bunch of coaches watching him at that. And then this past season, Cutter Woods against Sellers' old team, bringing them back, some late game heroics with South Carolina staffers there watching in person, Chris.
And Lenore Sellers was actually there.
Sellers did
hanging out.
Post a shout out to Cutter on the Twitter X machine as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of obviously South Carolina knew Cutter Woods, knew about him. They had communicated with him even before that state title game. But that, to me, was kind of one of the points where we started, I think, looking at it a little bit more, paying a little bit more attention. Now, remember at that time, South Carolina's top quarterback target then was still Ryan Montgomery from Ohio, who ended up committing to Georgia in April. But, you know, watching Woods, who had been on campus at South Carolina before at camp, and in-state guy from the upstate, you knew they were familiar with him. You know, his performance in that game with Loggins watching and some other members of the staff, you go, I wonder if this might turn into something eventually. He had a big year. I mean, as a junior, he threw for 3,900 yards, I think over 40 touchdowns. He rushed for a few more touchdowns. So he put up big numbers. Then Westside going into that game against South Florence, they were down 2 scores, I think, going into the fourth quarter. And then with, I think, less than 2 minutes left, Woods helped lead them on a 78-yard drive through a touchdown pass with just not much time left on the clock. Helps Westside to their first title since, I think, the late 60s. So, you know, he turned in a really good year. But even after that, you know, we're like, hey, is this going to be something to watch? But nothing really happened, you know. I mean, behind the scenes, was there still communication, et cetera? Yes, there was. But then some other stuff happened. You know, Montgomery commits in April to Georgia over Florida and South Carolina. Woods commits to Wake Forest this past spring as well. And it looks like, hey, you know, maybe he just ends up going to Wake Forest and that's it. But then, like you said, Wes, the Gamecocks, you know, they had that background, but then they saw him again in camp. Loggins spent a lot of time watching him. He spent a lot of time talking to the family. And then by Monday, you know, we were hearing, hey, there's a pretty good chance that this is going to end up happening.
What is he's currently listed as a consensus 3-star across the board. You mentioned the great numbers that he put up, obviously leading Westside to the championship. Is there potential for him to maybe rise to a 4-star over the course of his senior year?
Yeah, I think there always is. You know, I haven't, I mean, I'll be frank, like I haven't heard anything specifically like, hey, this guy is on the verge of rising to a 4-star at this point. Now, he put up great numbers, but, you know, most of your recruited quarterbacks are going to put up good numbers like that. And, you know, I think for him, you know, to get into that 4 or 5-star category in today's game, especially if you start talking about upper 4-star, 5-star, that's where the analysts are really going to want you to be, frankly, like a Lenore Sellers, where you're just a physical, you know, monster, basically. And, you know, I think Cutter physically can run the football a little bit. He can extend plays. He's not a statue, which you can't be a statue anymore. I think he's a little bit more, you know, I think South Carolina wanted to check the box. Can he make all the throws consistently from a physical standpoint at the 7-on-7, which he did, because I think a big part of his game, and Chris, you've seen him in person actually more than I have. You've seen him in the game setting. I think a big part of his game is kind of the intangibles as well, the knowing where to go with the ball, the leadership, that X factor with the game on the line, spreading the ball around. Like, he can make the throws, but I don't think he's the guy that's going to just wow you like a Sellers or a Spencer Rattler from the physical standpoint of, oh, he can spin the football. Like, you know, if you watch Spencer throw, the first thing you say is just like, how is he generating that much spin on the football? If you look at Lenoris, the first thing you say is, you know, this is a massive kid. And then you watch him move and you're like, you know, this is special. With Cutter, it's a little bit more of a traditional, like, he's going to have to play within the constraints of an offense to an extent, and you can win like that. But in today's college football world, I think the highest rated guys, like the top 10 quarterbacks, are going to be guys that are like chunking the ball 55 yards in the air on the run, basically.
Yeah, just incredibly elite, you know, scouting term, the arm talent, or an elite, you know, dual threat athlete. None of that is to say that Woods doesn't have a lot of characteristics that you really like, because he does. I mean, having seen him play, I mean, I think he's a gamer type as well. Definitely does not shy away from those big moments. He has kind of some fire to him, which I like. You know, he's a little bit feisty and fiery on the field, you know, demonstrative, but certainly also, you know, capable of delivering in those types of big moments. So, yeah, I mean, I think, look, this is a class where South Carolina wanted to take a quarterback. You know, it's interesting because if let's say they had not offered Cutter Woods, you know, they could have, you know, maybe they find another high school quarterback, but maybe they go to the portal, you know, for additional depth in the offseason. But now I think this is an ideal situation because you're bringing in a guy. He's not going to be under pressure to come in and immediately be the guy as in year one. You don't have that. He can come in, he can develop, learn the system, hone his craft, but he brings, especially as an in-state guy, I think he brings a lot of things to the program.
I think you can always tell from the reaction of other people too, like in, I would say the community, but really it's bigger than that, kind of throughout the football community within the entire state, because all these guys are more interconnected than ever. But just seeing some of the guys, I mean, I had picked up basically going into the official visit that Cutter had already been talking to some of the guys that were already committed to South Carolina that were going to be on campus that weekend as well. Like this is a kid that the other prospects in the state, they know him, they respect him. I think they respect his game. I saw a video posted like Mazio Bennett and Cutter played ball together back in like 12 under football. And won a championship together. Like, can you imagine facing off with those two guys? But in that community, especially in that kind of, in Chris's neck of the woods, up that way, Anderson area, then just the upstate in general, he's very well known, very well respected, a kid that has developed a reputation as a quarterback, like as kind of being the guy, being that leader that you want at that position. And so I always look at the reaction. Also part of the Ramon Robinson coaching fraternity at that position, or quarterback fraternity at that position, I would say. And so all those guys pull for each other, and I think it does speak to a little bit about kind of just the reputation he has created for himself in that community.
We'll see what this means for the South Carolina quarterback room going forward. Also a reminder, coming up on Thursday, from 9 to 12, we're going to be out at Firehouse on 542, Knox Ave Drive out there in Casey, broadcasting from 9 until 12. It's the Gamecock Central takeover of Firehouse in Casey, and that's coming up on Thursday. We'll dive into more conversation about Cutter Woods, what it means for South Carolina's quarterback room coming up. It's Gamecock Central takeover hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Tuesday here on The Game.